It seems during the pandemic, China's exports have soared to 60%. And coincidentally, it seems also like the US trade deficit has swelled up. It has increased by a lot during the pandemic. Now, of course, I might be a conspiracy theorist just for suggesting that those two things perhaps have a link, right? Right? But no, it's really obvious why that happened. And I don't think it is just the US at all in this that is a contributing factor. I think it is all the nations that did very harsh lockdowns and whatnot. See, the thing about China is that they have this sort of iron curtain around them, right? So it's not even an iron curtain, right? At least with the iron curtain, you didn't get any information out of it. But with China, it's almost like it is a deception curtain or something like that, where you never know what information you're getting out of there, and or whether it's even accurate. We saw like the perhaps one of the harsher lockdowns being instituted in China, and India followed as well early on. But then later on, they opened up pretty quickly, and I don't think they really bothered with testing more of their civilians early on or whatever. There after these harsh lockdowns and whatnot. So many things closed down, but I don't think they closed down entirely all the things that were necessary for the exports to happen. And that was perhaps a strategic move because they realized that in all of this, other countries are going to need masks, other countries are going to need all these sorts of things, house products and whatnot that are mostly just, plastic, sort of cheap products that the West is going to be producing. So I don't think they shut that down. And combine this with the fact that, all these sorts of European countries and God knows how many countries, I don't even know how many countries got, one form or another of government assistance, right? I mean, the US primarily just got stimulus checks, and Canada got stimulus checks as far as I remember. So there was a lot of imports that happened. So all of this money was going pretty much in importing stuff from China, right? And that is what they have done. Like there's some statistic on Twitter, I forgot who it is from, but it said something like, oh, China nearly doubled or quadrupled the amount of money printing during the COVID-19 lockdown. And that is their GDP, increase or whatever it is. It's not surprising that even, that may have happened because China is known and is on the list of countries that the US marks as currency manipulators. Not that it matters because the biggest currency manipulator, of course, is the United States itself. So I don't think it necessarily matters that they did that. They always do it, right? But the point is that they kept on changing the exchange rate, the money supply to match the exchange rate for the US dollar in order to accumulate, more and more dollars and send out more and more goods towards the Americans, right? And towards most of the Western world that just locked down and didn't do anything. Now, combine that with the fact that production, manufacturing, all these sorts of things were hit, whatever's left of it, right, were hit pretty badly during all this lockdown mania, and is still hit badly during the lockdown mania in the US and other Western countries. Now, the problem is that it is not just going to resume overnight, right? All this kind of production that has been, lost, all the lag that has been lost. So much of what the West may have produced efficiently, the slag must have been picked up by so many other companies around the world and all those sorts of things. There's a large displacement that happened of production. And I don't think that the US or, other countries that are just involved in this import mania, boosted by stimulus checks, is going to simply just restart their production and be like, okay, now we're at the same level as before, and China now needs our higher order machinery and whatnot. So that's one of the things that the U.S. and Western companies have got going for themselves: is the higher order of goods that they produce and the sort of no compromise quality type of deal that other countries need, right, to build their nations up. But with this expense, what really could happen over time is that these countries are gonna, the other countries in the East, or the emerging markets, they're gonna build their own machinery and whatnot over time. Now, of course, a lot of it rests on the politicians being right in the head and doing the right thing, which, is highly unlikely, but you never know, with the industrial forces in all these countries, what may or may not change over time as things go on. Like, you see a lot of cronyism sort of action going on in India, but it is in terms of it is, I would say it's bitter compromise is the best way I can put it, between privatization, the real privatization, which would be government taking its hands off, versus socialization, which is just the government getting full on involved. Now, it is closer to a more fascistic style of governance, which is not too dissimilar from China itself. So, it's not like, oh, if they follow their model, it's going to completely collapse or something like that, right? It is only going to get, better than before, with the government getting, well, less involved, let's just say, and especially not being directly involved. So one of the examples I can give you for this is the steel industry in India, for example, is like, or was controlled by the government. Now they're trying to hand it over to private bodies and bid it up and whatnot. So that is going to be far more efficient over what the government did, especially since it's going to have some competition, right? It's not going to have all the competition that would have existed otherwise, but it's going to have some competition, and that little bit even is gonna deliver far more in terms of productivity, efficiency, and all these sorts of things, and less malinvestments than what the government would do otherwise when they controlled the whole thing entirely, right? And a lot of it was going out of control of the government as well. So, and it still is not in control of private parties, in the sense that there's a lot of Maoists in the areas where materials and industrial metals are extracted, and they take over these mines and all these sorts of things that the private contractors then just hand over some money to these Maoists to get the materials, the raw materials, instead of trying to mess with them, because they are the ones that they're full on tankies, right? They have guns and whatnot, all that sort of equipment. So if it was a private law society, then we would see some action here with some private companies, private security going in and being like, no, this is someone else's property. You can't just squat over here in someone's mine and take over it and expect that we're just gonna let it be, or let it go because, oh, you were the scary Maoist taking over all these mines and whatnot. But we'll see what happens with that, over time. I mean, there's a lot more financialization happening. There's a lot more, I would say, cartelization, right? It's a better compromise. Again, I'm not in favor of this or that, or that being, government control, but what can you do, right? I mean, it's not in my hands to do anything. So, I can't really say that it's going to be any better. But in terms of why, I wanted to talk about why this situation exists with China to begin with, right? So, pretty much the West stopped being competitive to China. And in order to get back to China, everybody's talking about all this military action and all this trade deal action, tariffs and this and that. Tariffs are not going to accomplish anything. Tariffs are a tax on the people, because the Chinese don't pay the cost of tariffs. They only pay the cost of tariffs when your industries are competitive already. So let me give you an example. Let's say the wine from Italy costs $20. The wine from America costs $24. Now, Americans are importing Italian wine, which is $20, and you want, with a flawed ideology, your nation to consume the wine of your nation. What you can do is raise $4 of tariffs on Italian wine, and then, or maybe $5. So Italian wine is now going to be expensive, and people are going to then consume the American wine more, right? But in all of this, the point that is missed is that the people are still paying the price. What the beauty of the free market is competition. So what happens with this competition now is that people, the malinvestments don't happen, right? So people's extra $4 that they're saving per wine bottle can go to other industries of your nation or whatever that are more competitive, right? So they're incentivizing the better production, the more efficient production of your country over the less efficient production of your country, which increases prosperity instead. But you look at one or two products and you may think, oh, this is such a disaster that the foreign products are more cheaper. Well, fine, they can keep producing the wine while you make higher order machinery or some high value goods and export it to other nations. That's a far more lucrative business, and all those $4 that are saved can go in so many different things, in investments, in all sorts of things that they may get invested in, which will further the prosperity, which will increase efficiency. And of course, there comes the foreign exchange principles in this and whatnot. For that, I would recommend, if you haven't read already, Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. Right? He explains it in such a masterful way. It is, it's really astonishing how simply one can explain this. Because if I were to get in a conversation with someone who's a layman, I would have to give them a follow up of all the laws of economics and all those sorts of things. Well, not all of them, but a little bit of a background in order to explain the foreign exchange business and how it operates and how currencies are balancing each other. And there's nothing sort of evil about other countries' stuff being cheaper or whatever. But Henry Hazlitt, the way you follow the book, every page you turn, you're like, oh, so that's how it's done. Oh, so that's how it's done. Oh, so this is the reason why that exists. And as you finish the book, you don't even have to finish the book. Halfway through the book, you're like, okay, I get it. Yeah, exactly. He's talking about this. Okay, now that's going to happen. So, half the book is you spend, if you are like a logical person, you understand the very basics of supply and demand, or at least you think you do. You're going to start following what is going to happen in each scenario that he builds up very quickly. And that way, it's a very, enlightening experience for somebody who knows a little bit of economics or just wants to understand the economics. Just, if you are a living person and you see, products around you, you will still understand economics, even if you haven't ever dabbled into it, don't know what supply and demand is or anything like that, right? That's all I gotta say about it. I'm making it sound more complicated the more I speak, so I'm gonna cease speaking now. But that is what they do. Now, if you remember the Italian example that I gave just a little bit earlier, with China, the thing is with these tariffs is that you don't have American products that are that much cheaper than China by just a tad bit to offset any of these tariffs, right? So let's take the example of CCTV cameras, for example, right? The Chinese products are so much cheaper than what would be made otherwise in America because of all these regulations and whatnot that I'll get onto later, that even if you put a tariff on them, it's not going to create any kind of demand for American products, right? So what's going to happen is that, let's say they have CCTV cameras that cost $20, right? That is dead cheap for a CCTV camera, I think. Not that I'm in the market for it, or do I, or that I am aware of the prices, but let's say it is that cheap. You have the same products that are manufactured by American industries using American components. Let's just put that as well, right? Not global components and assembled here, right? Full American made. They're going to cost about like $100 or something like that. So that is the hypothetical difference. Well, not hypothetical, but somewhat that is, I think, a realistic difference between American products and Chinese products in America. So even if you raise the tariffs by, let's say, 30% on all Chinese goods coming in, what is 30% of, $20, right? It's going to be $26 now. So the American product is still like $100. What are you going to go for? Chinese products, of course. The CCTV cameras from China, and they're going to cost $26. So, you're still not making any difference. All you're doing is taxing your people, and that extra $6, where does it go to? Does it go to any American industry or anything like that? No, it goes in the government's pocket. That's where it goes to. So, you're literally taxing your people in the name of patriotism, fooling them into thinking that this is going to somehow benefit the American industry or whatever. And of course, people in the industry know that nothing's going to happen of this sort, because of the sheer amount of regulations that they're burdened with, that they have to deal with, and, all these land and labor laws that have been instituted, all that compliance, all the, unions and whatnot that make the production of these equipments and industrial supplies and all these sorts of everything pretty much so much more expensive than China that it's impossible. Now, the best thing that you can do to serve your country, if you're even a patriot, right, is that you buy most competitively in the market. So if you need a very good quality product, and that is more expensive, it is Western made, whatever, sure, go for that. But if you just want a cheap product or something, that you don't really care about, there's no point in buying American or buying, German or wherever you are from, right? The best thing you can do for your country is to purchase products competitively. That way, it motivates the industries in your country to, focus on the most efficient sections of the economy rather than focusing on the inefficient sectors of the economy, right? So that way, it is ensured that you'll stay competitive in the long run over other countries than incentivizing your inefficient sectors of the economy. Because if you have something that is inefficient, focusing the money on that will make it so that other countries may catch up with your other industries that are more efficient or that used to be efficient, and now those are rendered inefficient as well. So in the long term, the biggest harm that is done to your country by tariffs is incompetence. That's what happens. Your country is going to become incompetent over time by focusing on these industries just in the name of patriotism, and you're going to end up following all these sorts of inefficient industries. And what's going to happen after this? What do you think is going to happen? Stagflation sort of scenarios are going to happen with government involvement and money printing and all that sort of thing. Industry is going to get completely stagnated by regulations and totally encumbered by all these sorts of rules, land labor laws, and all those sorts of things that I talked about earlier, and minimum wage and all those sorts of things. And you're not going to see any real growth in the industries. And that, to a large extent, is happening, or has already happened in the West. It's stagnated by a lot, right? It is only because of past prosperity, remains that you have sort of in the country that you can still afford a lot of things. If you look at Argentina, what's happened in Argentina? I mean, their currency has gone to absolute garbage, and their government is as big as ever, right? And it's only getting bigger, to my knowledge. The last time I read up on it, I haven't caught up on it in a long while, but that is what happened there, right? And they have this stagnation, complete stagnation of life there as well. So if you look at Japan, everybody thinks of Japan as some sort of an advanced technology world or something like that. I mean, there's a YouTube channel called Radical Liberation that did an episode or a live stream on Japan. You should check it out. And it's a pretty good episode where they, analyze the economy of Japan and whatnot. And ever since pretty much the 80s, they have become absolutely stagnated, right, in their economy. So even if you look at Japan today, it may look like a very advanced society, but everything they have is nothing that is advanced from the 80s, right? I mean, they still have all those vending machine style stuff and all those sorts of buildings that are from the 80s boom era, right? Nothing much has changed. There hasn't been a lot of crazy developments that have happened over there in the past 40 years or whatever. So the rate of growth has slowed down by a whole lot. There was a time when Japan was what China is today to the world, right? Except without the communist aspect, right? Well, at least the official communist aspect, let's just put it that way. So they, at that point, were exporting so much products, and, so much product to the world and all those sorts of things. But then, of course, the government policies led them to stagnate and over time become, less competitive. And now there's only a few things that they're competitive in. And that is what is going to happen in the West, except I'm not sure about the competitiveness of all the sectors that still are today. Certainly, with things that are like luxuries and whatever, from Italy, these brand names and brand houses, they're going to survive. They're going to survive everything. Rolex is going to survive every downturn in the world, even if the world, most of the world goes into some kind of a totalitarian descent. It still is going to survive because all these dictators are going to want Rolexes still. And their bureaucrats and apparatchiks and commissars, all those guys with the black money and all those sorts of things, they're still going to want all these luxury products, right? So they're going to survive. The heavy industry, I'm not sure about that. I mean, initially, sure, that is surviving right now somehow, but over time, these emerging nations, when they become competent, when their raw materials are more accessible, like China did to their country, to the rest of their economy to do whatever with, they're gonna maybe outpace this industrial manufacturing sector as well, right? Right now, they're focusing on lower order goods that can be exported to the West, right? But when time comes for them to consume inwards, right, they're going to start focusing on machinery and whatnot that over time that they have to improve internally, right? Instead of just sending things outwards because their currency is not going to be stronger, right? And your currency is going to be weaker. So you're the ones in the West that are going to end up importing a lot of stuff over time, right? That is even a higher order if it gets inefficient, right? And of a lesser quality over time as well. I mean, that's a possibility, certainly. So, this is the road that leads to stagnation. We have already seen a lot of this happening. And the reason why exports from China have risen is pretty much all a fault of the West on its own. And the growth of China, the existence of the Communist Party as it does this, as this giant state that has so much influence in the world, they don't have it by mistake, right? Somebody became incompetent in the way that led them become so competent, right? It's not the superiority of communism or state distribution or control or fascism that has led them to become this giant state in the first place. It is the incompetence of the West to realize that, okay, we are doing these mistakes constantly, in our country. And it's not the Western people themselves, let's be clear on that. It's their government, which is a completely separate entity and should be seen as such by anybody who's a free-minded individual, right? Or independent individual, independently thinking individual. Let's put it that way, right? I'm just trying to become as less offensive as possible and all that, all that sort of stuff. But, that is what happened. And, that's really all there is to it. Now, what is the path to recovery in this? What is the silver lining in all of this? The silver lining is that this state control is not very efficient, right? Fascism is not very efficient. Communism is not very efficient. Ultimately, it is going to destroy itself, right? Right now, they're enjoying the riches of the West to enrich themselves, right? But over time, I think as the state control increases, it is going to choke their private sector up. And we're kind of already on the edge of that, right? And have been for like past 5 years or more, ever since the Chinese Communist Party started to choke on their private industry by sacking billionaires, making them disappear. All these companies that they're taking over, the interest or the trust in their nation as a place where somebody can invest and it being safe is slowly eroding. And as time goes on, the Chinese Communist Party may want to control all of these things as it kind of, sort of panics or gets spoiled. And it will, in the process, destroy itself by being a more controlling agency, by being a more, control freak state, right? So it will start to take over a lot of industries, a lot more share. It will start chokeholding innovation by only allowing certain things to happen and whatnot. So it's going to kill a lot of creativity in the name of Chinese propaganda, whatever, and that is going to render it inefficient and incompetent in the long run. So that is the silver lining. Another silver lining is the West itself, right? Now, the reason I think that this is a giant silver lining for the West is because they have experienced a past prosperity, right? A past age of prosperity where a lot of people are not going to just let go and forget about it. So, people are going to realize as things get more and more socialistic, state controlled, and whatnot in the West, they're going to realize that, okay, this is not how it used to be at all before. And economics is the best dictator of where politics goes before politics goes anywhere, right? Economic conditions. Now, it can go anywhere, really. Nobody knows. I mean, there certainly is a strain of fascistic tendencies. There certainly is a strain of, more market tendencies that is going to rise. But are we going to see any kind of fragmentation? Is the crucial question that, that is left unanswered at this point. So if we do see fragmentation, I think what we're going to end up seeing is a lot of fascistic activity in certain states, but in the broken up sort of states, we're gonna see some of the more market orientedness or return to normal or tradition or something like that. So and certainly this is not going to be the norm. I'm not saying that all of the nations are going to be like break up into some kind of fascistic empire and coordinate or whatever. I think that a few certainly may do this kind of thing, because there's a lot of ethno-national sentiment that is mixed into it, and they are pretty much prime rejectionist of economics. So it by itself is not going to yield anything, but the fact that it has a huge community that believes in fascism as the way to go with is the problem that is going to ultimately doom them, right? And then you have the other side, the liberals are going to probably, separate themselves or something like that. And they're the ones who may carry the torch forward in terms of, all the progress and new sort of prosperity that they're going to, light a candle for. Not in memory of, but just as a beginning point. I don't know the best term to describe it, but that's the way it is going to go, I think. Right. Not for the majority of the places in terms of being fascistic. Of course, I think the majority of the places are just going to change by their voting procedures, perhaps. Right. And I certainly hope there is more fragmentation action, though, so that nations can be better managed and their, competition can be ushered in. But if there is no, large scale fragmentation, which is the most likely outcome, there's going to be a lot of voting changes themselves that are gonna, maybe just, dial back a lot of these regressive policies in place and enshrine more economic growth and, certain, especially back to that high order industrial manufacturing centers or whatever, of that sort of thing. And the banking sector and all those sorts of things may grow as well. in a lot of these nations. So that is not to be discounted for. It's not just industrial manufacturing or any of that sort of thing. There may be nations that are heavily, banking dependent, like Ireland sort of is now, right? And they might just build themselves up upon investing in, growing sectors in the world, right? So investments in emerging markets and Africa, and having companies there, holding companies there, owning companies, starting companies there. That is one of the things that may happen as well. But I don't want to sound like some kind of an astrologer or predictor or anything. But I'm just saying what is the best case scenario in terms of the silver lining here. It is very much possible that ultimately, before becoming a completely lunatic control freak sort of state, China may just end up going down with taking other nations down with the ship, in the process, and that may bring about an era of even more stagnation for a lot of places. That is one possibility as well. So I'm not trying to be a predictor, but that's what I'm laying out from libertarian sort of market perspective is what I mean. But that's about it. I think I've said enough on the matter, and thank you for listening. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you again later, maybe on the next weekend.